Humanity had always been eager to explore the vastness of space. From the earliest days of space travel, humans had ventured farther and farther, discovering new worlds and new species. They believed that they were on top of the galaxy, pioneers of the unknown. But one mistake, one single provocation, was about to shatter that belief. Lieutenant Emily Holt stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, staring out at the swirling blackness of deep space. The ship, one of the finest the human alliance had ever built, was on a routine mission to explore a newly discovered planet. The crew was excited. It had been a while since humanity had found something new, something worth celebrating. The planet, a barren rock in a distant part of the galaxy, held the promise of rare minerals and untapped resources. But it wasn't the resources that would change everything. It was what the crew found on the planet's surface. "Captain, you need to see this," one of the officers called from the scanning station. Captain John Rivers walked over to the officer, a frown forming on his face as he looked at the screen. There, on the surface of the planet, was a structure, a massive ancient building, buried beneath the sand. The technology it displayed was nothing like anything they had seen before. "This doesn't make sense," Rivers muttered, his mind racing. This planet was supposed to be uninhabited, no signs of intelligent life. Yet here was proof to the contrary. The structure was clearly not of human origin. The ship's sensors confirmed that it had been there for thousands of years. It was old, but in surprisingly good condition. "Prepare an away team," Rivers ordered. "We need to investigate. This could be the discovery of a lifetime." Emily Holt was among the first to volunteer. As the chief of security, it was her job to make sure the crew remained safe. But deep down, she was also excited. The chance to explore something new, something beyond human understanding, was too great to pass up. The away team made their way down to the planet's surface in a sleek transport shuttle. The atmosphere was thin, but breathable, and the temperature was just cold enough to make the ground brittle. It took only a few hours to reach the structure. It stood tall, even though much of it was buried under layers of sand. The building looked almost like an enormous fortress, its walls adorned with strange symbols and alien writing. Holt was the first to step forward, her boots crunching on the sand. "This is incredible," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "I've never seen anything like this before." The rest of the team followed, their eyes scanning the structure, searching for any signs of danger. They were in unknown territory. There was always a risk when exploring new worlds, especially when it came to ancient, forgotten places like this one. "Let's get inside," Rivers ordered. "We'll see what's waiting for us." The entrance to the building was easy to find. The massive door had been cracked open, as if someone, or something, had been here before. Holt motioned for the team to stay alert as they moved inside. The air was stale, and the dim light from their helmets illuminated the dusty corridors. They moved deeper into the building, passing strange rooms filled with objects that looked like nothing from humanity's technology. In the center of the building, they found what seemed to be a control room. A large console sat at the center, surrounded by rows of seats. It looked like something out of an old science fiction movie. Buttons, levers, and strange alien markings on the walls. The walls themselves were lined with holographic screens that flickered to life as the team stepped closer. "Captain, look at this," Holt called, her voice shaking. One of the screens displayed a galaxy map. It wasn't like anything the humans had seen before. It showed entire star systems, planets, and regions far beyond their reach. But one thing stood out: a single red dot blinking on the map. Holt studied it carefully. The dot was on a world that wasn't far from their current position. It was in a part of the galaxy that was known to be home to a peaceful, long-forgotten species. But this time, the map showed something different. "Is it a distress signal?" Rivers asked, leaning over her shoulder. Holt nodded slowly. "I think it is. But there's something else here. A warning." Before Holt could react, a voice boomed from the speakers, sending chills down her spine. "Warning! The voice said in a deep, menacing tone, "You have awoken the Tark, and the Tark do not forgive." The message played over and over, each repetition drilling into their minds. The Tark, a name Holt had heard only in rumors, in whispers from frightened civilians. The Tark were considered the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They were ruthless, terrifying, and had a reputation for wiping out entire civilizations. "We've made a grave mistake," Holt muttered, staring at the screen. Rivers looked at her with a grim expression. "This isn't just a warning. This is a declaration. We've provoked something far more powerful than we could have ever imagined." The crew exchanged worried glances. They had unknowingly triggered a chain of events that could lead to the destruction of everything they had fought for. But it was too late to turn back now. The Tark were coming, and there was nothing the humans could do to stop them. As the message continued to echo in the control room, Holt realized the true horror of what they had just uncovered. The Tark were no mere legends. They were real. And now, humanity would learn just how terrifying they could be. The team quickly made their way back to the shuttle, but it was clear to Holt that their lives had just changed forever. The galaxy was about to experience a war unlike any it had ever seen before, and it was all because of one small, seemingly harmless mistake. As the shuttle lifted off from the planet, Holt could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. There was no going back. The galaxy had just been plunged into chaos, and humanity was about to pay the price. The tension aboard the Vanguard was palpable. As the crew sped back toward their home station, the words from the mysterious Tark warning still echoed in Emily Holt's mind. "You have awoken the Tark, and the Tark do not forgive." Those words weren't just a warning. They were a promise of what was to come. Holt paced nervously on the bridge, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound that broke the silence. Her fingers drummed on the armrest of her seat, the message from the Tark still fresh in her mind. They had made a mistake, a deadly one, and now there was no escape from the consequences. "Lieutenant Holt," Captain Rivers' voice broke her train of thought. "What's the situation?" "Still no word from the colonies, sir," Holt replied, her voice tight. "But we have to assume they're aware of the Tark by now. The attack is inevitable." Rivers nodded, his face grim. "We've already been in contact with command. They're sending reinforcements, but it might be too late. These Tark, they don't waste time." As the ship moved through space at maximum speed, Holt could feel the weight of the looming threat pressing on them. The Tark were coming, and they were coming fast. She had heard rumors of their brutality, their reputation as the most dangerous species in the galaxy, but she had never imagined it would come to this. "We should be ready for anything," Holt said, standing up from her seat. "I suggest we conduct drills for all crew members. We need to be prepared." Rivers agreed. "Do it. And make sure the rest of the fleet knows what's coming." Just as Holt began to move toward the communications console, an alarm blared across the bridge. The lights flickered, and the crew jumped into action. The ship's sensors were detecting something large. "Captain, we have a fleet of ships approaching at high speed," the sensor officer announced. "They're coming from the direction of the Tark homeworld, and they're moving fast." Holt's heart sank. "How fast are we talking about?" "Very fast, Lieutenant. Too fast to be anything but Tark ships." Rivers turned to Holt. "I don't need to tell you how dangerous they are. The Tark have no mercy. We need to prepare for battle, and we need to do it now." The entire crew scrambled to their stations. Holt made her way to the communications console and tried to send a warning to the nearest human fleet, but it was too late. The Tark had already reached the system. They had arrived faster than anyone had anticipated, faster than the humans could have prepared. The view screen on the bridge flickered to life, showing the enemy fleet. The ships were massive, with sharp, jagged edges that gave them an ominous, almost predatory appearance. Each ship was armed with weapons that made the Vanguard look like a child's toy. The Tark were ruthless, and it was clear that they weren't here for negotiation. All hands, prepare for battle, Captain Rivers ordered. The crew immediately began to brace for the fight of their lives. The Tark fleet surrounded the human ships, cutting off any possible escape routes. Holt could feel the ship's hull tremble as the Vanguard took its position in the center of the human defense. But it wasn't enough. The Tark ships were closing in too quickly, their weapons charging. Then, with a roar that shook the Vanguard, the Tark ships fired. Explosions rocked the Vanguard as the Tark unleashed their fury. The Vanguard's shields held for a moment, but Holt could see them weakening, cracks forming in their defense. She quickly ran to the weapons control panel, trying to fire back, but the Tark were relentless. Each blast they fired seemed to tear through the Vanguard's shields with terrifying precision. "Return fire! Return fire!" Holt shouted, trying to keep her composure as the ship shook with each explosion. The crew scrambled to follow her orders, but it was clear that the Vanguard was outclassed. "We're being overwhelmed," the weapons officer called out. "Shields are failing, Captain." Rivers gritted his teeth, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "We can't hold them off much longer." Holt's mind raced. She had read about the Tark's tactics. They didn't negotiate, didn't give second chances. Their ships were built for pure destruction, and they enjoyed nothing more than watching their enemies crumble. The humans had made the fatal mistake of awakening them. And now, the Tark were showing them the full extent of their wrath. "We need to retreat," Holt said, her voice shaking but determined. "We can't win this fight. Not without reinforcements." Rivers hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the tactical display. The Tark were closing in fast. Their fire was too intense, too relentless. The human fleet had no chance of winning without help. He nodded grimly. "Get us out of here, Lieutenant," Rivers ordered. "Full speed ahead. I don't care where we go. Just get us away from these monsters." The Vanguard's engines roared to life as Holt engaged the drive, pushing the ship to its maximum speed. The ship shuddered violently as it moved away from the Tark fleet, narrowly avoiding another barrage of weapons fire. Holt could feel the sweat on her brow as she watched the Tark ships loom larger in the rearview. The Tark weren't letting up. They were relentless, closing in faster than ever. Holt could only pray they would make it out alive. "Captain, we need to warn the colonies," Holt said, her voice tense. "The Tark aren't stopping here. Earth is their next target. We need to let them know, before it's too late." Rivers nodded. "Do what you can, Lieutenant, but we have to get out of this alive first." The Tark were just beginning their campaign of terror, and humanity was only now beginning to realize the true scale of the mistake they had made. The Vanguard's engines screamed as they pushed the ship to its limits, the hull vibrating with each powerful burst of acceleration. Holt gripped the controls with white knuckles, her eyes glued to the view screen as the Tark fleet loomed ever closer in the distance. The enemy ships were relentless, closing in faster than any of them could have imagined. "We're not going to outrun them," Holt shouted over the loud alarms blaring throughout the ship. The Tark were faster, and their weapons were hitting hard. It was only a matter of time before the Vanguard was overwhelmed. "Keep pushing," Captain Rivers barked, his voice tense but controlled. "We're not dying here. We need to warn the rest of the fleet." Holt was doing everything she could to keep the Vanguard on course, but the Tark ships were gaining. A sudden explosion shook the ship, throwing everyone off balance. The lights flickered, and the emergency alarms blared. "Damage report," Rivers demanded. "Shields are down to 30%. Hull integrity is compromised." The officer at the engineering station shouted back. "We're losing power on Deck 7. Get down there," Rivers ordered. "Fix it. Now." Holt felt the weight of the situation pressing on her. The Vanguard was a prized ship, one of the best humanity had, and yet it was no match for the Tark. Their advanced technology was built for one purpose: destruction. Humanity had woken a beast, and now that beast was hunting them. "We need to go to evasive maneuvers," Holt shouted. The Tark ships will pick us off if we stay on this course. Do it, Rivers commanded. Holt immediately began making swift course changes, zigzagging to make it harder for the Tark to target them. The Tark fleet mirrored their movements, staying just out of range to avoid a return fire. The Tark didn't need to shoot yet. They were letting the humans run, but they were closing the trap. Holt's stomach twisted as she realized the true scope of their strategy. "Captain," shouted the sensor officer, his voice shaking. "A Tark ship is locking onto our starboard side. It's too close." "Brace," Rivers ordered. The Vanguard rocked as a massive blast from the Tark ship slammed into the ship's starboard side, ripping through the outer hull. Sparks flew from the damaged consoles, and Holt could hear the wailing of alarms that warned of imminent systems failure. "Seal off the affected areas," Rivers barked. "Get those fire crews to Deck 7. Holt fought to maintain control, trying to hold the ship steady as the Tark unleashed another barrage of fire. They were so close now. The Tark ships almost within reach of their final strike. A sudden thought struck Holt like a lightning bolt. They weren't going to make it. At least, not in one piece. "We need to jump," Holt shouted, desperation creeping into her voice. "We need to use the FTL drive. Now. There's no way we can make it to the jump point in time." The tactical officer replied, his eyes wide with panic. But Holt had no choice. She could feel the pressure mounting. Everything was falling apart. The Vanguard was being torn apart, and their only hope for survival was to get out of the Tark's range. Holt began the calculations, the pressure building to an almost unbearable level as she worked to input the coordinates for a FTL jump. "Calculating trajectory," she shouted, sweat pouring down her face. "It's going to be close. Hang on." The Vanguard was now little more than a sitting target, and the Tark knew it. Their relentless barrage continued, pounding the ship's shields into submission. The ship's entire structure groaned under the strain as the Vanguard veered wildly to avoid another blast. "We can't outrun them," Rivers muttered, his eyes narrowing. "We're losing this fight." Holt took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she input the final code for the FTL jump. There was only one chance to make this work, and they had to pray the Tark wouldn't land the final blow before they made it out. "Hold on," Holt called out, before slamming the activation button. The Vanguard lurched forward as the FTL drive roared to life, sending them streaking across the vastness of space. The stars blurred around them as the ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind the Tark and their merciless barrage. Holt could barely hear the cheers of the crew as the ship settled into the calm of FTL space. For a moment, it felt like they had escaped. The Tark were no longer on their tail, the ship's systems were stabilizing, and the crew was safe, for now. But Holt knew the truth. This was only a temporary respite. The Tark would come for them again, and this time they would be prepared. "We've only bought ourselves a little time," Holt said quietly, wiping sweat from her brow. "But we've got to warn Earth. We've got to tell them the Tark are coming." "Yes, Lieutenant," Rivers agreed, his voice heavy with the weight of what was to come. "Prepare the crew. We're going to need every bit of strength we can muster if we want to survive the next wave." As the Vanguard sailed deeper into the unknown, Holt couldn't shake the feeling that their war had only just begun. The Tark weren't going to let this slip. They were a force of nature, unstoppable, unrelenting, and humanity had made a fatal mistake by provoking them. The universe had just changed, and the consequences of that mistake would echo throughout the galaxy for a long time to come. The Vanguard hurtled through FTL space, the stars stretching and twisting into streaks of light as they entered hyperspace. Despite the brief calm, the tension aboard the ship was thick, palpable. The crew had just survived one of the deadliest encounters of their lives. But Holt knew it wasn't over yet. They had made a bold decision by provoking the Tark. Now the consequences were catching up with them, and the Tark were a relentless enemy. "We need to figure out where we're going," Captain Rivers muttered as he looked over the tactical display, His eyes narrowed in concentration. We can't stay in FTL for too long. We don't know what kind of countermeasures the Tark have for hyperspace. We have no choice, Holt said, her voice sharp. We need to get to Earth. The Tark are too strong. If they get to Earth, we're done. Rivers nodded grimly. Plot a course, Lieutenant. Holt quickly began inputting the coordinates into the FTL drive system. Her mind raced as the numbers and data streamed across her console. Earth had to be their destination, but Holt couldn't shake the feeling that even that would not be enough. The Tark were too close, too dangerous. What if they could track them through hyperspace? Her hands flew over the console. Course set. Jumping to Earth in 3 minutes. Rivers turned to face her, his expression serious. How much time do we have before we have to engage the FTL again? Holt hesitated, her eyes scanning the readouts. We should have about an hour, maybe less. That's not enough, Rivers muttered, pacing back and forth. We'll have to make another jump soon. And if the Tark have figured out how to track us through FTL, we might not make it. His words settled heavily over the bridge. If the Tark had the technology to follow them through hyperspace, humanity might not have a single safe haven left. Every option seemed like a gamble. Holt clenched her fists, determined. We're going to make it. We'll get to Earth, and we'll warn them. We have to. As the minutes ticked by, the Vanguard sliced through space, but the feeling of being hunted never left. Holt couldn't escape the gnawing anxiety deep in her gut. They were running out of time, running out of options. We've got incoming. The sensor officer suddenly shouted. 2 Tark ships dropping out of hyperspace. Impossible, Rivers exclaimed, his eyes widening as he glanced at the readings. They shouldn't be able to track us through FTL. But the sensor officer's voice was urgent, filled with panic. They're not just tracking us, Captain. They're ahead of us. The implications hit everyone like a wave of cold water. The Tark were ahead of them. They had predicted the Vanguard's route. Holt's stomach turned. This was no longer a pursuit. It was a trap. Get us out of here, Holt. Rivers barked, his voice rising. Without hesitation, Holt slammed her hands on the controls, attempting to break the ship out of its current trajectory. But the Tark were already closing in, and they weren't going to let the humans escape this time. The Vanguard's shields flickered, struggling to stay online as the Tark unleashed a barrage of fire. The ship rocked violently, and Holt felt the pressure of the situation mounting as alarms blared throughout the vessel. We can't outrun them, Holt gritted through clenched teeth. They're too fast, too powerful. Brace for impact. Rivers yelled as another round of fire hit the Vanguard. The ship lurched under the force of the blast, and Holt could hear the telltale crackle of fire spreading across the hull. We need to jump, Holt shouted, her voice full of urgency. We're not going to survive if we don't make a FTL jump now. We don't have enough time to plot another course, Rivers said, his face grim. But if we stay here, we're dead. Holt's mind raced. They had only one option. Make a jump to somewhere they couldn't predict, somewhere the Tark couldn't follow. But it would be a risk, a huge one. We're going blind, Holt warned, inputting the coordinates for a random point in deep space, hoping they wouldn't end up in a star or some other deadly location. Do it, Rivers ordered, his voice sharp. Holt hit the activation button, and the Vanguard shot forward into the unknown, the ship shaking violently as they initiated the FTL jump. The stars blurred once more, the ship racing through hyperspace as the Tark's weapons continued to bombard them. For a brief moment, Holt felt her heart stop. They were free. For now. But as the Vanguard hurtled through the unknown, Holt couldn't help but feel a chilling certainty. They weren't safe. The Tark would find them. And when they did, the battle for humanity's survival would be a fight to the death. The Vanguard's sudden leap into the unknown was not as smooth as Holt had hoped. The ship shuddered violently as they tore through uncharted space, the FTL system struggling to stabilize. Red lights flashed all around, casting an ominous glow over the bridge. The hum of the engines, once a steady reassurance, now sounded like a warning. They were far from any known systems, and it was only a matter of time before the Tark would catch up, no matter how well they'd hidden their trail. "Damage report," Captain Rivers barked, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "Shields are down to 30%. We're leaking coolant into the starboard engine," Lieutenant Holt reported, her fingers flying over the control panel, her heart racing. "We can't keep this up much longer. We'll need to find a safe place to land, or we'll be sitting ducks." "We can't afford to land anywhere, not with the Tark on our tail," Rivers said, a grim expression spreading across his face. "We need to get to Earth. We need to warn them before it's too late." Holt's fingers paused over the console, her mind running through the limited options they had. Earth was still their best chance at survival, but even getting there was growing more uncertain by the minute. The Tark would surely have a fleet capable of tracking their escape, and no matter how many times they jumped, it would only delay the inevitable. "Captain," said the sensor officer from across the room, her voice trembling, "I think we've got a problem." Holt and Rivers exchanged a quick look before turning toward the officer, who had her eyes glued to the monitor. "What is it?" Holt asked, her voice strained. "Multiple ships. Tark ships," the officer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're dropping out of FTL. They're right on top of us." The words sent a chill down Holt's spine. It was as though the Tark had known exactly where they were going. Had they been tracking them all along? "Activate evasive maneuvers," Rivers ordered, his voice cutting through the panic that had begun to ripple through the bridge. "Prepare to return fire." The Vanguard rocked as the Tark ships fired, their weapons lancing through the void bright beams of energy that lit up the surrounding darkness. Holt quickly engaged the Vanguard's engines, trying to maneuver the ship out of their firing range, but it was like trying to dodge raindrops in a storm. The Tark were closing in, their ships faster and more agile. "Captain, they're locking on to our engines," the weapons officer yelled. "We need to make a hard turn. Now." Holt's hands slammed onto the controls, guiding the Vanguard into a violent roll, the ship spinning wildly as it dodged another blast. The crew inside the ship were thrown sideways, holding on to anything they could as the gravity stabilizers fought to keep them on course. "We've got to get out of here," Holt muttered to herself. "If we keep going like this, we're going to run out of fuel before we reach Earth." But the Tark were relentless. They pursued with a singular focus, as if nothing in the universe could stop them. The Vanguard was barely holding together, the damage piling up. With every evasive maneuver, Holt could feel the ship struggling to stay intact. It wouldn't be long before the Tark figured out their weak points and exploited them. "Initiating AFTL jump," Holt said, her fingers shaking as she keyed in a random set of coordinates. "We have to do this. It's our only chance." But the FTL drive was not responding. The jump coordinates were locked, but the system refused to engage. Come on," Holt cursed under her breath, desperately trying to override the system. "Target lock in 5 seconds," the weapons officer yelled. "They're too close, Lieutenant. We won't make it." The tension on the bridge reached a fever pitch. Holt's heart hammered in her chest as the countdown continued. She could hear the blasts getting closer, the rumble of the Tark ships shaking the Vanguard from all sides. They were out of time. "Do it. Override the systems," Rivers shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "We either jump or we die here." With a final surge of energy, Holt slammed her palm onto the override button, her breath held as the FTL drive finally hummed to life. The ship shot forward, and the stars streaked into the infinite black once again as they leaped into hyperspace. For a brief moment, the crew was silent, breathless. They had survived the Tark's pursuit, but just barely. Holt stared at the redouts, her mind spinning. Where had they jumped to? Was it far enough to shake the Tark off their trail? "We've made it," Holt breathed. For now. But in the depths of her mind, she knew it wouldn't last. The Tark were too powerful, too relentless. The Vanguard had bought them some time, but only time. The real battle was yet to come. The Vanguard drifted silently through the void of space, its battered hull still holding strong despite the damage they'd endured. The crew had been silent for hours, each lost in their own thoughts as the quiet hum of the ship's systems was the only sound that kept them grounded. Lieutenant Holt, however, couldn't shake the feeling that their escape was too easy. The Tark were relentless. They never gave up so easily. She stood in front of the control panel, staring at the blinking lights that indicated their course. They had jumped to an uncharted part of the galaxy, far from any known systems. It should have been enough. Should have been. "Lieutenant," came Captain Rivers' voice from behind her, pulling her from her thoughts. "We need to talk." Holt turned around, meeting the captain's eyes. There was something in his gaze, a look she couldn't place. "What's going on, Captain?" Rivers took a slow breath, clearly weighed down by whatever was on his mind. "We didn't escape by accident, Holt. I've been going over the data. The Tark didn't follow us because we were lucky. They let us go." Holt's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "The Tark never let anyone go." "That's what I thought," Rivers replied, his tone cold. "But the systems show a pattern, a deliberate one. They didn't pursue us full force, not like they usually do. It's like they were letting us slip away, to make us think we were safe. They've planned this." Holt's mind raced. She knew the Tark were smart, but this was a level of cunning she hadn't anticipated. It made no sense for the Tark to retreat when they had them in their sights. Holt tried to focus, to make sense of what was happening, but something deep in her gut told her that they weren't just being hunted. There was something worse at play here. "The Tark didn't just give up the chase," Holt said slowly. "They want us to believe we're safe. They're making us think we've escaped, but—" She paused, her fingers moving over the console, checking for anomalies. Rivers stepped closer. "They want us to be overconfident, to think that we can let our guard down." It hit Holt like a hammer to the chest. The Tark weren't just chasing them. They were testing them. They were playing a game, and the Vanguard was their pawn. "Where are we now?" Holt asked, voice strained. "We're on a course toward a nearby planet," Rivers said, scanning his console. "But that's not all. There's something else you should know." Holt raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The captain's voice dropped. "There's a saboteur on board." The word struck Holt like a physical blow. "What? A saboteur? How can that be?" "We've gone through security checks. We've made sure everyone was cleared." Rivers nodded grimly. "I thought the same thing. But the damage to the Vanguard wasn't just from Tark fire. It was from internal sabotage. Someone here is working against us, and they've been leaking our location to the Tark." Holt's thoughts spun. Who could it be? Who among the crew would betray them? She couldn't believe it. They had all fought together, bulled together. The crew was family. Yet someone had sold them out. "Have you identified who it is?" Holt asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not yet," Rivers said, his eyes narrowing. "But I have a feeling we're going to find out soon. I don't believe it's anyone on the bridge crew, but there's someone among the lower ranks who is hiding something." Holt clenched her fists. "I'll get to the bottom of this, Captain. I'll find out who's behind this." Rivers nodded, but there was a shadow in his expression. "We can't afford to waste time. The Tark won't wait, and neither will our traitor. They'll strike when we least expect it." Just then, a sharp alarm blared across the ship, cutting through the tension like a knife. The alert lights flashed a bright red, casting an eerie glow across the bridge. Holt turned, her heart pounding. Something was wrong. "We're being tracked again," the sensor officer announced, her voice filled with dread. "They found us." "No," Holt whispered, her mind racing. How had the Tark found them so quickly? She glanced at Rivers, who was already standing, his jaw set with determination. "They weren't after us before," Rivers said through gritted teeth, "but now they are." The Vanguard jolted again as the Tark ships, seemingly out of nowhere, appeared on their radar. This time, they weren't holding back. They were coming in full force. "Brace for impact," Rivers shouted. As the ship rocked under the weight of the Tark fire, Holt's thoughts went back to the traitor. They had been betrayed. And now, they were about to pay the price for their enemy's patience. The battle had just begun, and everything they had worked for was hanging by a thread. Who was it? Who had sold them out? Holt's mind burned with that question as the Vanguard continued its desperate race through the stars. The Vanguard shook violently as the Tark forces bore down on them, unleashing wave after wave of relentless firepower. The sound of clashing metal and the rumble of explosions filled the air, echoing through the hallways of the ship. The crew had fought before, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the truth. Lieutenant Holt stood at the bridge, her eyes glued to the tactical display. The Tark had launched a full-scale attack. Their ships were fast and aggressive, closing in quickly. They didn't just want to kill them. They wanted to make a statement. They had underestimated the Tark once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. "We need to get out of here," Holt shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Helm, evasive maneuvers. Get us out of this trap." The ship jerked as it responded to the commands, but the Tark ships were too fast, too powerful. They had the Vanguard cornered, and every attempt to break free was met with brutal resistance. "Cap, we're losing shields," yelled Ensign Harris, his voice strained from the pressure. "The outer hull is taking critical damage." Captain Rivers stood firm at the command center, his eyes scanning the battlefield. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. "We need to make our stand here. We can't outrun them, but we can fight." Holt clenched her fists. She wasn't sure if they had the strength to win this battle, but they couldn't let the Tark see fear. They had to show them that humanity was not to be underestimated. They had to fight back. "Do you know what's worse than being caught in a trap?" Rivers said grimly, "Not knowing how you got there." Holt turned to him, understanding dawning in her mind. "The traitor, you think they're part of the Tark plan, don't you?" Rivers nodded slowly. "The Tark didn't just stumble upon us. Whoever sold us out, they'd been feeding information to the enemy from the inside. We're surrounded because of them." Holt's blood ran cold. It was worse than she had feared. But it wasn't over yet. She wouldn't let it be over. Not while there was still a chance to fight back. "We'll find them, Captain," Holt said firmly, "and we'll make them pay." The tension on the bridge was palpable as the crew braced for impact. The Tark ships continued their barrage, and it was clear that if they didn't act fast, the Vanguard would be torn apart. But Holt wasn't about to give up. "Set course for the Tark flagship," Holt ordered, a fire in her eyes. "We're not running anymore. We're going to make them regret ever underestimating humanity." Rivers didn't hesitate. "Helm, take us in." The Vanguard turned sharply, heading straight for the Tark flagship, a move that stunned the Tark fleet. They hadn't expected the humans to fight back so fiercely. It was a gamble, a desperate move. But it was the only chance they had. "All weapons ready," Holt commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "This is it. We fight for our lives and for our future." The ship charged forward, its weapons blazing. The Tark flagship loomed ahead, its massive size dwarfing the Vanguard, but Holt wasn't intimidated. The crew had nothing left to lose. This was their last chance. As the Vanguard tore through the enemy's defenses, Holt's mind raced. They were facing a battle they should have never been part of, but humanity's strength was undeniable. They had been underestimated by every species in the galaxy, but they had one advantage the Tark didn't: their will to survive. "Captain," Ensign Harris shouted, "the enemy flagship is within range." Holt's pulse quickened. "Fire everything we've got." The Vanguard unleashed a barrage of missiles, energy beams, and plasma shots. The Tark flagship shook as the blows landed, but it wasn't enough. The flagship's shields were holding strong, and the Tark were closing in on them from all sides. The traitor was still out there, somewhere within the ship. Holt's anger flared. She couldn't fight the enemy and search for the saboteur at the same time. She had to trust her crew to hold the line while she dealt with the betrayal inside. "Lieutenant Holt," a voice shouted over the comms, snapping her out of her thoughts. "There's someone on board. The traitor. They're trying to sabotage the weapons systems." Holt's heart stopped. It was happening now. Whoever was behind this had set them up for a final blow. They had to stop them, or all would be lost. "Rivers," Holt yelled, rushing toward the hatch. "I'm going after the saboteur." "Go," Rivers shouted back. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." Holt raced down the corridors of the Vanguard, her mind focused on one thing: stopping the traitor. She couldn't let this betrayal succeed. Not now, not after everything they had fought for. As she neared the weapons bay, Holt's pulse pounded in her ears. She could hear footsteps behind her. Someone was following her. She turned sharply, drawing her blaster. A figure stepped into view. "I knew you'd come for me." It was Ensign Thorne, the quiet one. Holt's heart sank. "You're the traitor," she whispered, disbelief in her voice. Thorne's lips curled into a sad smile. "You were always too trusting, Lieutenant. You should have known someone was feeding them information. Someone had to do it, and it might as well have been me." Holt steadied her weapon. "You sold out your own people for what? Money? Power?" Thorne's expression darkened. "You don't understand. The Tark were the only ones who saw my worth. They promised me a future, a place where I wouldn't just be nothing. They promised to make me someone important." Holt's gaze hardened. "You're nothing. You're a coward." The Vanguard shuddered again as more explosions rocked the ship, but Holt didn't flinch. She was ready. Thorne moved first, lunging toward her with a knife drawn. But Holt was faster. She fired her blaster, striking him down before he could reach her. As he fell to the ground, Holt's stomach twisted. This was the betrayal that had almost destroyed them all. But they had stopped it. The traitor was dead, and the Vanguard had one final chance to win. Racing back to the bridge, Holt's thoughts were sharp. It wasn't over yet. They still had to finish what they started. The Tark wouldn't go down easy, but humanity wouldn't go down at all. And as the final battle raged outside the Vanguard, Holt felt something stir within her, a belief, a hope that they could win, that they could survive, no matter what.